It was supposed to be the happiest moment of her life. A new marriage. A fresh beginning. A promise of family and forever. But before the echoes of wedding bells could even fade, that promise turned into the darkest of nightmares. A husband. A wife. And a teenage daughter. 3 people left for a honeymoon. Only 2 returned. What really happened in those final days? Police say the phone call came in just before midnight. The voice on the other end was panicked, trembling, almost rehearsed, yet laced with fear. He said, "She's gone. We can't find her. My stepdaughter is missing." Then silence. A silence so heavy that it chilled the operator who answered the call. By the time authorities arrived, the scene was not what anyone expected. The room was too clean. The luggage was neatly stacked by the door. Dinner plates sat untouched on the table, as if frozen in time. And yet the air was heavy. Something was wrong. Very wrong. But here's the question that haunted every single investigator from that moment forward. Why would a grown man insist that his teenage stepdaughter go with him and his new bride, on their honeymoon? This is the story of Darius Holloway. A man who looked like everything a woman could dream of. Successful. Charismatic. Handsome. A man who, in church, wore a smile so wide people said he could light up the entire room. But behind that smile lay a hunger for control. This is also the story of Monique Sanders Holloway. A woman who had carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. A single mother for 16 years. She worked double shifts as a nurse, came home to cook, to clean, to care for her only child. She prayed for the day she would no longer have to carry that burden alone. She thought Darius was the answer to her prayers. And finally, this is the story of Aaliyah Sanders. Just 16 years old. Bold. Talented. Unafraid to speak her mind. She was a girl who painted the walls of her room with dreams. Dreams of traveling, of designing, of stepping into the light of her own future. But those dreams would never be fully realized. Because someone took them away. The Holloways had just been married in a small but beautiful ceremony in Atlanta. Friends and family gathered. The bride wore white lace. The groom stood tall. The daughter walked down the aisle, holding her mother's bouquet. Photographs captured smiles that looked perfect, but if you looked closer, if you studied the frame, you might see it. A hesitation in Aaliyah's eyes. A distance between her and the man her mother had chosen. Still, after the vows, there was joy. At least, there appeared to be. Friends congratulated Monique. Family hugged Darius. And when the reception ended, talk turned to the honeymoon. That's when Darius shocked everyone. He said, "We're not going alone. Aaliyah's coming with us." The room went quiet. Laughter died down. Elaine, Monique's mother, looked at him with disbelief. She asked him why. She asked him what kind of man would bring a 16-year-old girl on a honeymoon. Darius smiled. His answer was simple, but unnerving. "We're a family now," he said. "No separation. No secrets." Monique hesitated, but she didn't fight him. She wanted peace. She wanted to believe this was love. And so, against her mother's pleas, she agreed. The honeymoon trip would not be for 2, it would be for 3. That decision would change everything. Days later, the Holloways arrived at a lakeside resort in Georgia. It was supposed to be paradise. A cabin near the water. A fire pit outside. Trails that led into the woods. For most families, it would be a dream. But for Aaliyah, it felt like a trap. At first, the photographs they posted online looked normal. A dinner by the lake. Smiles at the cabin. A selfie at the dock. To outsiders, it was picture perfect. But those who knew Aaliyah noticed something different. Her smile never reached her eyes. Then came the text messages. To her best friend she wrote, "I don't feel safe here. He keeps watching me. He keeps telling me we're family. Something feels wrong." And then the words that would later break her mother's heart, "If anything happens to me, tell my grandma I love her." That was the last message she ever sent. In the days that followed, the world of Monique Sanders shattered piece by piece. The arguments at the cabin grew louder. Staff at the resort recalled seeing the teenager storm out of dinner one night, tears streaming down her face. A maid noticed bruises on Monique's arm. And then, on the night of June 14th, everything changed forever. When police asked Darius to explain what happened, his story was thin. He said Aaliyah left the cabin after another fight. He said she wanted space. He said she never came back. But investigators would soon learn the truth was far darker, and far more deliberate. Because by then, Aaliyah Sanders wasn't missing. She was gone. And the question that still burns to this day is this. Was this a tragic accident? A runaway gone wrong? Or was it something planned from the very beginning? What follows is a story of love turned toxic, a marriage built on secrets, and a honeymoon that became a crime scene. A story of a mother's broken heart, a community's outrage, and a justice system's fight for answers when a body was never found. This is not just another crime. This is the case of the Holloway honeymoon. And this is the story of Aaliyah Sanders. To understand how this story unfolded, you have to understand the people inside it. Behind every headline, every police report, every courtroom testimony, there are human beings with scars, with secrets, and with choices that shaped everything that followed. Let's begin with Darius Holloway. Darius was the kind of man who carried himself like a king. Born and raised in Macon, Georgia, he grew up in a house where discipline was handed out with fists, not words. His father was a strict military man, cold and unbending. His mother stayed silent, often retreating into the background as conflict filled the home. As a boy, Darius learned early that strength meant control, and control meant survival. By his teenage years, he was already known for his charm. He could talk his way out of trouble, convince teachers to give him second chances, and win over girls with his easy smile. But beneath that surface, there was a different side. Friends remember his temper. One moment he was laughing, the next he was slamming a locker door or walking away without explanation. As he grew into adulthood, that pattern followed him. His first marriage ended in whispers of emotional abuse. His second collapsed under allegations of infidelity and controlling behavior. Yet somehow, he always landed on his feet. Always charming his way back into new circles, always convincing someone else to give him another chance. He was successful in business, running a small but profitable contracting company. To outsiders, he looked like a man who had it all together. But behind closed doors, those closest to him saw something else. A need to dominate. A hunger for control. Then came Monique. Monique Sanders was everything Darius was not. Gentle, compassionate, and selfless to a fault. She was born in Atlanta, the oldest of 3 sisters. From the age of 9, after her father walked out, she carried responsibilities no child should ever have to carry. She babysat, she cooked, she comforted her mother when nights grew long and tears fell heavy. By the time she was in high school, she had already learned how to sacrifice her own needs for others. When she became pregnant at 19, her world shifted again. Friends told her to give up her dreams, to forget about school, to settle. But Monique refused. She studied nursing at night, worked shifts in the day, and raised her daughter with whatever strength she could find. To her, Aaliyah was not a burden. She was a blessing. Monique never asked for much. All she wanted was stability. Someone to lean on. Someone who would see her heart, not just her struggles. So when Darius walked into her life, polished and confident, she believed maybe God had finally sent her someone to carry the load. But there was one person who never fully trusted him. Her daughter. Aaliyah Sanders. 16 years old, yet wise beyond her years. She was born into struggle but raised with love. Her mother was her anchor, her grandmother her protector, her art her escape. Friends say Aaliyah had a laugh that filled a room and a voice that carried truth without hesitation. She didn't play games, she didn't pretend. If she didn't like you, you would know. And she did not like Darius Holloway. At first, she tried. She wanted her mother to be happy. She smiled when Monique asked her to, sat at dinners she didn't want to attend, nodded politely when Darius gave his long speeches about family and loyalty. But behind those smiles was a growing discomfort. She told her friends, he's always watching me. He gets too close. He tries too hard to act like he's in charge. In one text message to her cousin, she wrote, "Mom's happy, but I don't trust him. He scares me." That fear wasn't only about what Darius said. It was also about what he didn't say. The way he would pause, stare, and then smile as if he knew something no one else did. The way he touched Monique's arm just a little too firmly when he wanted to make a point. The way he always had to be the one making decisions, from what they ate to where they sat to how long they stayed. For Aaliyah, those were red flags. For Monique, they were things she brushed off, telling herself, he's just being protective. But there was someone else who saw through Darius from the beginning. Elaine Sanders, Monique's mother. Elaine was a force of nature. Strong, outspoken, and deeply rooted in her faith. She had raised Monique after her husband left, and she had stood by her daughter through every storm. From the very first moment she met Darius, her instinct screamed no. She told Monique, something about him isn't right. He smiles too wide. He talks too slick. You better be careful. But love has a way of silencing warning bells. And Monique, exhausted from years of carrying life on her own, convinced herself that this time was different. Still, Aaliyah felt it. She felt it every time he stepped too close. Every time he called her princess with a tone that didn't feel right. Every time he insisted on being included in moments that should have belonged only to her and her mother. And then came the moment that turned those fears into something much darker. The wedding. On the surface, it was beautiful. Friends gathered in pastel colors. The church filled with music. Monique walked down the aisle with tears in her eyes, believing her future was about to change forever. Aaliyah walked beside her, clutching flowers, her face calm but distant. Elaine sat in the front pew, hands folded tightly, whispering prayers under her breath. But when the vows were spoken and the celebration began, Darius made the statement that froze the room. "We're going on our honeymoon," he said. "And Aaliyah's coming with us." Gasps. Confusion. Questions whispered across the tables. Elaine stood up, her voice sharp, asking why. Why on earth would a 16-year-old be dragged into a honeymoon? Darius smiled, steady and calm. "Because we're a family now," he said. "Families don't separate. Families stay together." Some people nodded politely, unsure what to make of it. Others looked away, uncomfortable. Monique hesitated but finally gave in. She told herself it was just a trip, just a chance to bond. But in her heart, something ached. Something didn't sit right. And for Aaliyah, that decision felt like the beginning of the end. From that moment, the countdown had already begun. Because once the wedding ended, once the champagne glasses were cleared, once the music faded into silence, the Holloways packed their bags. 3 people left for that lakeside resort in Georgia. But only 2 would return. At the wedding, his words fell like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of unease across every table. "We're going on our honeymoon. And Aaliyah's coming with us." The silence that followed was suffocating. Monique's smile faltered. Elaine's eyes widened with fury. Guests shifted uncomfortably, pretending to sip champagne, whispering under their breath. A honeymoon is supposed to be sacred, a space for love, for intimacy, for two souls to begin their journey together. But Darius didn't want two. He wanted three. Elaine's voice broke the silence. Her words cracked with disbelief. Darius, why would you say something like that? That's not right. And in front of everyone, Darius laughed. Not the laugh of a man caught off guard, but of a man who had already decided. Because we're a family now, he said again. Families stay together. That night, when the reception ended, Elaine pulled her daughter aside. Her hands gripped Monique's shoulders, her eyes filled with desperation. Baby, don't do this. Don't let him take her. Something about this man isn't right. Monique's voice trembled. Mama, he just wants us to bond. He wants Aaliyah to feel included. You don't understand, he makes me feel safe. Safe. That word would haunt her forever. Because what Monique called safe, Aaliyah called suffocating. When she heard Darius announce that she would be dragged along on the honeymoon, she felt her stomach drop. Aaliyah tried to protest, but one look from her mother silenced her. She didn't want to ruin the night, didn't want to cause more tension. She swallowed her fear, smiled weakly for the camera, and went back to her seat. But inside, a storm raged. 3 days later, they left. The trip to Georgia should have been filled with excitement. Instead, it was filled with dread. Aaliyah sat in the back seat of the car, her headphones in, her eyes fixed on the blur of trees rushing past the window. Music played, but it couldn't drown out the sound of Darius' voice in the front seat. He spoke constantly, about how families work, about loyalty, about respect. Every word felt like a sermon, a lesson, a warning. Monique listened, nodding occasionally, her heart split in two. She wanted peace. She wanted her daughter to accept this man. She wanted her new husband to feel honored. But every time she glanced into the rearview mirror, she saw Aaliyah's eyes, distant, guarded, pleading silently. When they finally arrived at the lakeside resort, it looked like paradise. Cabins tucked between tall pines, a glassy lake reflecting the sky, the sound of birds echoing across the water. It was the kind of place couples came to escape the world. But for Aaliyah, it felt like isolation. A place where no one could hear her if she screamed. At first, things seemed almost normal. Dinners by the fire pit. Long walks near the dock. Family photos uploaded to social media. To the outside world, it looked like a perfect trip. A family bonding, a new chapter beginning. But behind closed doors, the cracks grew wider. Witnesses recalled the tension. Staff at the resort later testified that they could feel it whenever the Holloways entered a room. One night at dinner, Aaliyah pushed her plate away, muttering that she wasn't hungry. Darius slammed his hand on the table, startling everyone around them. Eat, he told her. Don't be disrespectful. The room went silent. Monique's hand trembled as she tried to soothe them both, whispering that everything was fine. But everything was not fine. That night, Aaliyah sent a message to her best friend. It read, "I don't feel safe here. He keeps watching me. He says we're family, but it doesn't feel right." She paused, then typed again. "If anything happens to me, tell my grandma I love her." It was the last text her friend would ever receive. The next morning, Aaliyah barely spoke. She lingered outside the cabin, sketching quietly in her notebook. She drew the lake, the trees, the outline of the cabin. When Monique asked what she was working on, Aaliyah closed the book quickly, hiding the pages as though they were secrets. Darius watched her from the doorway. His eyes followed her every move, and when she looked up, he smiled. But it wasn't a smile that comforted. It was a smile that unsettled. One evening, resort staff recalled hearing raised voices coming from the Holloway cabin. Aaliyah's cries, sharp and angry, followed by Monique's pleading voice, and then Darius' low, steady tone. Moments later, the door opened, and Aaliyah stormed out, tears streaking her face. She walked quickly across the grounds, disappearing into the trees. Staff considered checking on her but hesitated, believing it was just another family argument. Hours later, she returned. Her face pale, her eyes hollow, her shoulders tense. She went straight to her room, closing the door behind her. That was June 13th. On June 14th, Aaliyah Sanders vanished. Darius claimed she walked out after another fight, but the story didn't add up. She had no wallet, no phone, no shoes. Monique's voice, trembling with terror, carried across the phone lines to her mother that night. "Mama, pray for us," she said. "Something's not right." And something was not right. Because that night, 3 people entered the cabin. But the next morning, only 2 came out. The night was heavy with silence. The kind of silence that feels alive, pressing against the walls, swallowing every breath. Outside, the moon stretched its pale light across the lake, painting the water in silver. Inside the cabin, however, a storm brewed. June 14th, 11:47 p.m. Monique later recalled that the evening began with something as ordinary as dinner. Aaliyah barely touched her food. Her fork scraped against the plate, moving pieces of chicken around without taking a bite. Darius watched her every move, his jaw tightening, his eyes hard as stone. "Eat," he said again. The word wasn't loud, but it was sharp. It cut through the air like glass. "I'm not hungry," Aaliyah whispered. Her voice trembled. It wasn't defiance. It was fear. Monique tried to mediate, her hand brushing Aaliyah's arm, her words soft, pleading. "Sweetheart, please. Just a little, for me." But before Aaliyah could respond, Darius slammed his hand on the table. The sound echoed through the cabin. Glasses rattled. Aaliyah flinched. The argument spiraled from there. Voices rising. Accusations flying. Darius' voice was low, controlled, deliberate, like a man who never lost an argument. Aaliyah's voice cracked with pain, desperation, the helpless cry of a girl trapped. Neighbors in the next cabin later testified they heard shouting. They couldn't make out every word, but they remembered the sound of a girl crying. They remembered the plea, "I want to go home." And then, silence. The silence after the storm. At 12:13 a.m., Monique texted her mother. "Mama, something's wrong. Pray for us." Elaine never slept that night. She clutched her phone, waiting for another message, praying for one. But no more came. Around 1 a.m., a witness walking near the lake said they saw a shadowy figure pacing outside the Holloway cabin. Back and forth, like a man consumed by rage or panic. The witness didn't think much of it at the time. After all, couples argued. Honeymoons weren't always perfect. They walked on. Inside, the storm reached its peak. Monique's voice cracked as she begged. "Please, Darius, she's just a child. She's my baby. Don't." Her words broke into sobs. Aaliyah's cries echoed, muffled, desperate. And then, nothing. By morning, the cabin was eerily calm. Darius told staff that Aaliyah had stormed out. That she'd been emotional, dramatic, unwilling to accept him. He claimed she ran off into the night after their fight. But when resort employees searched the area, they found no trace of her. No footprints on the trail. No movement captured on nearby security cameras. No shoes missing from the cabin. Aaliyah's phone sat charging on the nightstand, her sketchbook lying open on the bed. The last page she had drawn was the lake, dark, endless, almost swallowing the cabin whole. Monique was inconsolable. Her screams carried across the resort as she begged for someone to help her. "She wouldn't leave me. She wouldn't just leave me. The local sheriff's department was called. Officers arrived around 9:00 a.m., finding Monique trembling, her hands shaking as she clutched her daughter's sketchbook like it was her lifeline. Darius, in contrast, was calm. Too calm. He explained everything as though he had rehearsed it. His voice steady, his posture unshaken. "She left after the argument," he said. "Teenagers run away all the time. But investigators knew something was wrong. Because teenagers may run away. But they don't run away barefoot. They don't leave their phones behind. They don't leave their mothers sobbing on the floor." And Aaliyah Sanders was not the kind of girl who simply disappeared. That night, the lake grew darker. Search teams combed the woods. Dogs sniffed for her trail. Helicopters circled overhead. Volunteers held flashlights, calling her name into the suffocating silence. But the only answer was the sound of water lapping at the shore. By dawn, whispers began. Guests at the resort leaned into one another, murmuring what no one dared to say aloud. That maybe she hadn't run away. That maybe she hadn't walked out at all. That maybe she had never left the cabin. And the truth, the horrifying, unshakable truth, was that 3 people entered that cabin on June 14th. By June 15th, only 2 remained. The sun rose over Willow Creek like it always did. Birds sang. The lake shimmered. Vacationers stepped out of their cabins with coffee cups in hand, ready for another day of relaxation. But for Monique Sanders, morning was a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Her daughter was gone. The cabin floor still bore the marks of the chaos, a glass shattered near the sink, chairs pushed out in a hurry, the faint echo of arguments that had ripped through the night. And yet, to an outsider's eyes, it looked normal. Ordinary. But Monique's screams made sure no one mistook this for ordinary. "She wouldn't leave me. She wouldn't leave without me," she cried, her voice so raw, so broken, it pierced the deputies' hearts. Her body shook violently, as though her soul was being ripped from her. Meanwhile, Darius sat at the edge of the bed, eerily composed. His hands folded. His words measured. His tone unshaken. "She stormed out," he repeated. "She was upset. That's all. Kids do this." But the deputies had questions. Why had she left without shoes? Without her phone? Without even her sketchbook? Why did no camera pick her up leaving the property? And why, most of all, did her mother believe so strongly, with every fiber of her being, that Aaliyah hadn't simply run away? Detectives swarmed the cabin. They examined the walls, the floorboards, the windows. A K-9 unit sniffed every inch of the property. But the dogs gave no indication she had gone into the woods. No scent led away from the cabin. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The search widened. Deputies knocked on doors, questioned every guest. Some remembered hearing shouting late at night. Others recalled the muffled sound of crying. One family even remembered a thud, loud, heavy, just before midnight. Theories spun through the air like wildfire. Did she run to the water? Did she fall in? Or, did something far darker happen behind those cabin walls? Monique clutched her daughter's belongings as if they were sacred. Aaliyah's phone. Her favorite hoodie. The sketchbook that held her dreams in pencil and ink. She rocked back and forth, whispering to herself, as tears streamed down her face. She would never leave me. Not my baby. Not my baby. Detectives watched her. They saw a mother drowning in grief, consumed by love for her child. Her pain was real. Palpable. Then they turned to Darius. His calmness disturbed them. His composure unsettled them. He didn't search the woods. He didn't call her name. He didn't cry. He didn't even look worried. Instead, he stuck to his story, repeating it like a prayer. She left. She'll be back. This is what kids do. But the detectives noticed something else. Something that gnawed at them. Tiny inconsistencies in his words. Little cracks in his story. The timeline didn't add up. The details shifted. And the way he described Aaliyah, not as a beloved stepdaughter, but as a problem, a burden, a drama queen, made their blood run cold. By the second day, search teams combed the lake. Boats skimmed across the surface, divers slipped beneath the dark water. Locals stood at the shore with candles in their hands, praying, hoping, whispering her name into the wind. But the water gave nothing back. Every hour that passed felt like a lifetime. For Monique, each second was agony, her daughter's laughter echoing in her ears, her absence suffocating her chest. At one point, she collapsed onto the ground near the lake, sobbing so violently deputies had to help her stand. "Please," she begged them. "Please find my baby. She's out there. She's out there." The sheriff placed a hand on her shoulder, but his eyes betrayed the truth. He knew. The longer a child is missing, the smaller the chance they return alive. And in this case, the evidence was screaming something even darker. This wasn't a runaway. This wasn't an accident. This was something else. Something unspeakable. And all eyes began to turn to the man who insisted she come on the honeymoon. The man who watched her every move. The man who wasn't crying. The man who had everything to lose if the truth came out. Darius Holloway. The stepfather. The last man to see Aaliyah alive. By the third day, the search had turned from hopeful to desperate. Volunteers still called her name into the woods, their voices breaking against the emptiness. Boats still circled the lake, the water rippling under their lights. But the hope, the fragile, trembling hope, was fading. And the whispers began to spread. First among the deputies. Then among the searchers. Then in the town itself. Maybe she hadn't wandered off. Maybe she hadn't drowned. Maybe the truth was far darker. And every whisper led back to the same name. Darius. Monique felt it before anyone spoke it aloud. The coldness of his stare. The way his story never changed, yet never felt right. The way he carried himself, not like a grieving stepfather, but like a man waiting for it all to blow over. She looked at him one morning, her face hollow from sleepless nights, her eyes swollen from endless tears. She whispered, her voice trembling with rage and grief. "What did you do to my baby?" Darius didn't flinch. He just glared back, his jaw tightening, his silence screaming louder than any denial ever could. Detectives noticed. They noticed everything. The way he avoided certain questions. The way his timeline shifted by minutes that didn't exist. The way he spoke of Aaliyah not with love, but with disdain, reducing her to a rebellious girl or a problem. But Monique painted a different picture. She wasn't rebellious, she cried. She was bright, she was sensitive, she was my world. She drew, she sang, she was my Aaliyah. She wasn't a problem. She was a child. Her sobs filled the sheriff's office. And even the hardened investigators couldn't ignore the difference. One voice cold and rehearsed. One voice broken but true. Then came the evidence. Phone records showed no activity after she vanished, no texts, no calls, no trace of a runaway girl. Her shoes were found neatly under the bed. Her sketchbook still lay open, the unfinished drawing staring up at them like a frozen scream. And a neighbor finally came forward. She remembered something chilling. A sound she couldn't forget. A loud thud. Followed by silence. Followed by nothing. The deputies returned to the cabin. This time, their eyes searched deeper. They found what they'd missed the first time. Small stains on the rug. Too faint for the naked eye, but undeniable under luminol. Blood. Not much. Just drops. But enough. And DNA confirmed it, the blood was Aaliyah's. When Monique was told, she collapsed, screaming, her body shaking uncontrollably. She clawed at the floor, as though trying to pull her daughter back from the void. No. No. She's alive. She has to be alive. But in her heart, she knew. Something terrible had happened in that cabin. And the man she had trusted with her heart, her marriage, her new beginning, was the same man the deputies now believed had taken everything from her. On the evening of June 19, the sheriff's department made their move. Darius Holloway was placed under arrest. The image of him being handcuffed seared itself into the town's memory. Monique stood frozen, watching as the man she once called her husband, the man who vowed to protect her, was led away in silence. She wanted to scream at him. She wanted to claw at his face. She wanted to demand the truth. But when their eyes met, all she saw was emptiness. Cold. Hollow. A man who had already buried the truth somewhere no one could reach. The press swarmed. Cameras flashed. Headlines blared, stepfather arrested in disappearance of teen girl. The community was torn between horror and rage. Mothers clutched their daughters tighter. Fathers shook their heads in disbelief. How could a honeymoon, a celebration of love, turn into a crime scene? But for Monique, this wasn't just a headline. This was her life shattered beyond repair. Her daughter was gone. Her husband was a suspect. And her soul was left in ruins. The courthouse was silent that morning, but inside, the air was thick with tension. Every seat was filled. Mothers, fathers, neighbors, reporters. Everyone came to see the man accused of turning a honeymoon into a nightmare. Darius Holloway. He walked in shackled, his eyes still cold, his posture still upright. No remorse. No tears. No flicker of humanity. Only defiance. Monique sat at the front row, clutching Aaliyah's sketchbook against her chest like a shield. Her face was pale, hollow. Her hands trembled, but her gaze never left him. She wanted him to feel her eyes burning into his skin. The prosecution began. Piece by piece, they built the story. The bloodstains in the cabin. The neighbor's testimony of the loud thud. The timeline that unraveled under questioning. The absence of any trace of Aaliyah after that night. They painted a picture of rage, control, and obsession. They told the jury what Monique already knew in her soul, that her daughter never left that cabin alive. And then came the witnesses. The neighbor, her voice cracking as she recalled the sound. It wasn't normal. It was heavy. Like something, like someone, falling. The forensic expert, describing how the blood matched Aaliyah's DNA. The detective, recounting the chilling calmness of Darius during questioning. No concern. No urgency. No emotion. Just, nothing. But the moment that broke the courtroom was when Monique took the stand. She walked slowly, each step a battle against the weight of grief pressing down on her shoulders. When she sat, her hands shook as she held the Bible. Her voice wavered, but her pain made every word burn into the hearts of the jury. She wasn't just my daughter, she whispered. She was my best friend. My reason to keep breathing. She was light. Pure light. And she trusted him. She trusted the man I married. And he. Her words broke. Tears streamed down her face. The courtroom sat in silence, the only sound her sobs echoing off the wooden walls. She forced herself to go on. He told me, she stormed out. He lied to my face. I begged him to help me search. And he sat there. Calm. Cold. Empty. I knew then. I knew my baby wasn't coming back. Jurors wiped their eyes. Reporters scribbled furiously. Even the judge, hardened by years of tragedy, lowered his gaze for a moment. And across the room, Darius stared at her. His face unflinching. His mouth set in a thin line. No apology. No remorse. Just silence. The defense tried to break her. They suggested Aaliyah was troubled, that she might have run away, that Monique's grief clouded her judgment. But Monique didn't falter. She lifted Aaliyah's sketchbook, showing the jury the half-finished drawing her daughter left behind. This is what she was doing before he took her. This. Not running. Not leaving me. She was drawing. She was dreaming. And he stole it from her. He stole her future. The room fell silent. No defense could counter that. When closing arguments came, the prosecutor's voice thundered through the chamber. Ladies and gentlemen, this was not an accident. This was not a runaway. This was the calculated, deliberate act of a man who wanted control. He wanted her gone. He silenced her, forever. And now he wants to silence the truth. Do not let him. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman's voice shook as he delivered the verdict. Guilty. On all counts. The room erupted, gasps, sobs, whispers. Monique collapsed into her sister's arms, crying so hard it seemed her body might break apart. She whispered her daughter's name again and again, as if summoning her spirit into the room. And Darius? He sat motionless. His eyes cold. His mouth shut. As deputies led him away in chains, he didn't look back. Not once. Justice had spoken. But justice could not bring Aaliyah back. And for Monique, the verdict was both a victory and a life sentence. She had fought for the truth. She had torn herself open in that courtroom. She had won. But when she walked out of those doors, the world was still empty without her daughter. Years passed, but the wound never closed. It never softened. Some wounds don't. Some scars stay raw forever. When people asked her how she survived, she would pause, her eyes distant, her voice trembling. I didn't survive, she would say. I'm surviving. Every day. One breath at a time. And that was the truth the world didn't want to hear. Justice doesn't heal. It doesn't erase. It doesn't bring back laughter or love. It only marks the end of one story and the beginning of another, the story of living with absence. Monique carried that absence like a cross. But in her heart, she carried something else too, the memory of a girl who loved to draw, who dreamed of becoming more, who smiled with her whole face. And as long as Monique breathed, so too would Aaliyah's light. The screen fades to black. A single line remains. Justice is not the end. It is only the beginning of the silence that follows.